b'nei beitcha b'karov. And then one that we love to sing around the table. We do all the verses, but I'm not going to do them right now. But sing along with this one if you know this one. Echad mi yodea, Echad ani yodea, Echad Eloheinu, 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 Sheba shamayim uba'aretz, Shnayim mi yodea, Shnayim ani yodea, Shnei luchot chavretz, Echad Eloheinu, 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 Shema shamayim uba'aretz. And then, of course, Ilu hotzianu, hotzianu mi Mitzrayim, hotzianu mi Mitzrayim, dayenu, dayenu, surely singing, dayenu, dayenu. That's it, Sam. Dayenu. Another verse. Ilu natan lanu et hashabat, natan lanu et hashabat, dayenu, 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 And I'd like to do a couple of tunes for you. These are tunes that you might not know, partly because I wrote them, but we do them at our Seder. And if you, by the way, if you'd like to have these, I'll be happy to record them for you or send you the music, because I have both for you. And this is one that we do when we light the Yom Tov candles at the beginning of the Seder. Lights of freedom burning bright, giving off your sacred light. Say a prayer for me tonight. Blessed lights of freedom, tell our people everywhere, send your light into the air. Let it glow so we can share the blessed lights of freedom. Living in a world of darkness where no light can gleam, freedom was only a dream. Of freedom shine for me, glowing candles bright and free, until all the world can see our blessed lights of freedom. And finally, a song about Elijah. You know, we all know Eliyahu Hanavi. And I decided to try a different approach to that because it has kind of a gospel feeling to it. And if you read the lyrics, which most people don't do, it's really very messianic, and it has a lot of interesting messages in it. So I've done it in English so you get all the meaning of Eliyahu Hanavi. Waiting for Elijah, he's the prophet sent from Tishbe. Waiting for Elijah, I hope he's coming to us speedily. Waiting for Elijah, hand in hand he'll come with David's son. Waiting for Elijah, everybody's waiting. clap along. He's the prophet sent from Tishri, waiting for Elijah. I hope he's coming to us speedily, waiting for Elijah. Hand in hand he'll come with David's son, waiting for Elijah. He'll be bringing the anointed one. Everybody's waiting for something. Everybody's waiting for someone. Everybody's waiting for something. Everybody's waiting for someone. Waiting for Elijah. And now the prophet from Encino, Rabbi Ed Feinstein.
Hardly, but thank you, Canterbury, and it's wonderful to sing with you, especially do some new melodies. So thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. Thank you to Canterbury for enlightening our Seder. So we're going to talk tonight about how to make Passover particularly special, the deeper meanings of the Seder, some of the secrets that are coded into the Seder. What I want to do is begin with something very practical. The holiday of Passover is the telling of our master story. The entire holiday is encoded in this one line of the Mishnah, which is found in our Haggadah. B'chol dor v'dor chayav adam lirot et atzmo ke'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim. In every generation, we have to see ourselves as if we personally came out of Egypt. The whole holiday is supposed to give us that sense that we were there. This isn't just remembering history, commemorating events of our past, gathering in the experiences of our ancestors. This is the appropriation of history as if it were memory, ki'ilu, as if we were actually there. And we're going to talk a little bit later about why that's so important. But first of all, the question is, how do you do that? And the entire structure of the holiday is exactly that. What is the Seder? The Seder is the last night we were in Egypt. We were slaves, and our parents were slaves, and their parents were slaves, and so forth. And we had no hope. And then this fellow Moses came and said, pack your things, we're going to leave, and we're going to leave quickly. And we had time for one more meal. And that's the meal we ate. And imagine what that meal is like, the exhilaration of almost being free, and the fear of what's coming, and the terror of what's going on outside, and all the anticipation that goes with it. That's what the Seder is. And that's the kind of atmosphere we're trying to create at the table. Of course, that's not so easy. First of all, it's really hard this year because we're going to have a hard time just gathering the family at the table. But even under the best of circumstances, when you gather your family at the table, when you gather your friends at the table, everyone's coming with different sense of what this is tonight. And everyone has a different sense of patience for the whole service. And everyone has a different way of doing it. So let's begin with some very, very simple, practical things that you can do. I'm going to begin with 10 tips for a better Seder. You ready? We'll start very practically. The first one I owe to my brother-in-law. My brother-in-law used to come and complain endlessly at the Seder, how long it was and how boring it was and how he didn't want to do it. And the only question he would ask at the table is, when do we eat? And one year I got so angry at him, I took a time clock, a kitchen timer, set it to 1 hour, put it in front of him and said, Ricky, this dings, we eat. He became very calm. And I think I understand why. Because you can get through something, even if it's kind of long, knowing that it's going to come to an end. But if you don't know where there's going to be an end, or if there's going to be an end, it's impossible. So knowing that it was an hour long, or 45 minutes long, or 35 minutes long, or even 20 minutes long, that made it bearable for him. So set a time clock and say we're going to eat in about an hour. And when the thing dings, you'll just move to the end, say the brachot, and eat the dinner. Number 2, people get hungry. Now, we use for karpas, for the green vegetable that's on the Seder plate, we tend to use parsley. Nobody eats parsley, except people who really like Denny's. Don't eat parsley. Make karpas salad. That's what it was originally. Take a big tray, Fill it with what they call crudité, all of the crunchy vegetables, peppers and carrots and asparagus and artichoke heart, whatever you want to put. And we do dip things in salt water. And the reason for that isn't just because it was the tears of our ancestors. It's because that was the cheapest salad dressing available to poor people. You can do better. Make guacamole. Get a nice dressing of some sort. Pesach dik, easy. And that way you put something out on the table and people can share. People can share munchies through the whole Seder and no one's going to complain that they're starving. Number 3, drink good wine. Listen very carefully. I'm an ordained rabbi. I'm telling you this from the bottom of my heart. Nowhere in the corpus of the Jewish tradition are you commanded and obligated to drink Manischewitz. If you happen to like Manischewitz, God help you, but it's there. But you can do much better. There's so much good wine, even good kosher wine. Very, very good kosher wine these days. So please get some good wine. Invite questions. We're going to come back to that one in a few minutes, but the 4 questions of the Seder are really only meant to get you started. We'll come back to that one in just a second. Sing songs. The cantor just gave us a couple of new ones. If you go online, there's lots and lots of great music. Use a good Haggadah. You can do better than the Maxwell House. That was the one I grew up on. But there's lots of good ones. We have a pretty good one from VBS that's available on our website. You can go. There's a wonderful site. I think I'll put it in the chat so everybody can find it. It's called Haggadot.com. Haggadot, Haggadot.com. And Haggadot.com is a most wonderful collection of Haggadot. There's hundreds of them. And it's a wonderful program. What you do is you take one that you like, or even just a template, and it becomes your template. And then you can cut and paste sections from many different Haggadot into your Haggadah. And every year create a new Haggadah with new poetry, new images. These days you can even put video images in it if you're going to do a Zoom Seder. So go look at Haggadot.com and do something creative. If you happen to be into social justice, there's great social justice Haggadot. If you're a feminist, there's feminist Haggadot. If you're an environmentalist, there's environmentalist Haggadot. If you're a traditionalist, there's Haggadot with lots of text and study. Use a good Haggadah, for God's sakes. Couple of other quick things. Make the second night different. And don't let it just be a rerun. Do something different. Go deeper into the Seder. Ask a different question. Get to the second half. I will testify that I was 17 years old before I realized that the Seder didn't end when my father unbuckled his belt and fell asleep. What happened in the second half of the Seder is about tomorrow. The first half of the Seder is Pesach la'avar, Pesach that happened in Egypt. The second half of the Seder is the Messianic part. That's where Elijah comes in. And if you can get to that half, it's really about the hopes that we hold, the sharing of hopes. And the 2 most important things, prepare the Seder and tell the story. Remember that the whole purpose of the holiday is to share the story. And in order to share the story well, you have to do more than just cook a big meal and clean the house and invite guests and set out plates. That's lovely. But you really need to take a few minutes and think about, how can I present this story to my guests, to my family, to my friends, to the people that are gathered with me? So take a little while to strategize. I'm going to give you some more tips in just a moment. And second of all, be sure that whatever you do, tell the story. I think all of us have a memory of an uncle or a grandfather or a relative who would go through the Seder sort of mumbling in old-fashioned languages, and we never understood what it was. But that's not what it's about. It's about sharing the greatest story the Jewish people ever told. A story of hope, a story of liberation, a story of redemption. That's what the Haggadah is all about. That's what the whole idea is all about. And if you're not doing that, you're not really fulfilling the obligation of having a Seder. So try and tell the story. Now, the hardest part of telling the story, of course, is you have different people around the table. Some people are traditional and they just want to go through the traditional Haggadah. Some people are really not part of the Seder at all and have never been to a Seder, or have been to Seders but don't quite know what to do. Some people have agendas of their own that they want to bring. The easiest way to negotiate the fact that you have a diverse group of people sitting with you is to take the middle part of the Seder, or actually every part of the Seder, and attach a question to it. And especially if you're on Zoom now, it's very easy to do. Attach a question to it and allow people to schmooze a little bit, to add their own parts of the Seder. So let's take a look at some suggestions for this. And I'm really interested in anything that you come up with, both this year and in future. Oh, that's not the one I wanted. That's the one I wanted. Of course, the famous question is, why is tonight different? But there's so many different ways to ask that question. So when you're doing the beginning, at the very beginning, we make blessings of Kiddush, right? You bless you sanctify the day, do Bori Pri Hagafen, and then you do the Kiddush for Yom Tov. Stop at this point and ask everyone to go around the table and talk about who and what has been my blessing this year. What has been my blessing? What has been a blessing to me this year? And who in my life is a blessing to me? Who in my life is a blessing to me? And that's going to mean something, right? And it's going to mean something because people are going to turn to each other and they're going to touch each other, and it's going to be sweet. When you get to Urchatz, which is the washing of hands, which is kind of fun because we've been washing our hands, compulsively all year. But what washing your hands is to step away from the world to inhabit the drama of the Exodus. It's like stepping onto a stage when a play is about to begin. Because after all, that's what the Seder is. The Seder is a play. The table is our stage. The food is the prop, right? But we're about to pretend. And here's the first pretending question. If we were going to leave tonight, if we were packing up to go, what would we bring? What would we bring with us? I was once invited to a lovely Seder when I was a graduate student in New York, and the guy who invited us said, bring a suitcase and put in the suitcase what you're going to bring out of Egypt and wear your traveling clothes and bring your passport. So we all came to his house with suitcases, dressed like we would be leaving tonight. We all had our passports in our pockets, and we all had our suitcases. What I didn't know is he had no chairs around the table. We had to sit on our suitcases the whole night. My wife brought a nice soft one. I had a hard Samsonite. I'm still hurting. But the nice part was that during the course of the evening, he asked us each to open our suitcase and bring out what it was we're taking out of Egypt tonight. One woman brought out a set of candlesticks that her mother had smuggled from Europe. One person brought a photo album that contained the moments, the images of their life. Somebody else had a book that meant the world to them. The object that really carries your memories is a beautiful thing to begin with. Karpas, the green vegetable. Remember, I told you have a big tray of munchies, but if you're going to when you make the bracha over the green vegetables, go around and ask everybody, what's new this year? What has been new in your life this year? Well, this year, everyone's going to laugh because it's been a wild year for us all. But what have we learned? What have we discovered? What have we found? What have we gained? And most of all, how have we changed this year since last Pesach? Yachatz. The next thing we do in the Seder is to break the matzah. It's done without a bracha, but I think there's a wonderful question to be asked, because breaking is something that unfortunately we are dearly familiar with now. What have we lost this last year? What's missing? Who's missing from last year? Who's missing from last year? And if you're so inclined and you want to stop for a moment and think about all the losses we've had this year, to think about the thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who've been lost to the virus, to think about these dreadful shootings these last couple of days, at Yachatz, when we break the matzah and feel the brokenness of the world, I think that's a really good time to do that. And maybe if you have a little time to prepare and you ask some of the guests to bring a word of poetry to reflect on this, or just their own reflections on the events that have happened this last week or this whole year, that would be quite remarkable. Magid is the telling. And I'm going to spend a lot of time on that in a few minutes. We're going to get to that as well. But it's the hardest part of the Seder, because after the 4 questions and the 4 children, the 4 kids, the whole thing becomes a very technical midrashic exercise. So here are a couple questions that you might want to ask. Instead of going through the text of the Haggadah, ask these questions, because we know what we're here to celebrate. The Hebrew for Egypt is Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim literally means the narrow place. Mitzrayim, Egypt, is the place we got stuck. Where are we stuck this year? Where are we stuck this year? Where are we stuck as individuals? Can you tell me where you're stuck Where's America stuck this year? Where's the Jewish people stuck this year? Where have we gotten stuck? What is the narrow place, and how can we get unstuck? How do we get out of the stuck place, out of the bondage of being stuck? You ever been stuck in life? You ever found your place in self in a place where you couldn't move in life? That's Mitzrayim. How do you get out of that? At the end of this telling of the story of the Exodus, we're going to get to the 10 plagues. That's certainly relevant this year. What are all the plagues that we've had to deal with this year? And how have they affected us? And the most interesting thing is this, the question that we discuss in our Seder every year is, are the plagues punishments or consequences? Punishments imply a sort of authority from above, casting them down. That's sort of how the Bible tells the story. But there's also a way to read the plagues as if they're consequences. Societies make choices, and choices bring consequences. And when a society chooses cruelty, when a society chooses to dehumanize a chunk of its population, what are the consequences that follow upon that choice? When we look around at the plagues that we have suffered this last year, or the plagues that are endemic to our society at this moment in our history, they're not punishments, they're consequences. What are the consequences of? What choices did we make? And what choices would we have to fix if we wanted to do that? And then once we tell the story of the plagues, we cross the Red Sea and we begin singing the song of Dayenu. And Dayenu, of course, is a song of gratitude. So the question is, what are we grateful for this year? Earlier, we talked about what we lost this year. Now we'll talk about what we've gained. What are we grateful for? What are the miracles we have witnessed this year? And Elijah, if you're not the kind of family that's going to get to the second half of the Seder, do the Elijah thing in the first half. Because the Elijah is a symbol of hope. And opening the door to Elijah means we're opening the door to hope. So what do we hope for this year? And how in this course of this year of plague and pandemic and everything else we've witnessed, how have we resisted cynicism and held on to hope, sustained our hope? And that, after all, is what Passover is. I want to make this very, very clear. If there's one word that captures this holiday, it's hope. We were slaves, and our parents were slaves, and their parents were slaves, and we had no hope. We had no power over our own being. We had no dignity as human beings. Moses came and took us from Egypt, crossed the Red Sea, and the whole of the Seder focuses on that one moment at the other side of the sea. You imagine a group of slaves realizing that Pharaoh's not chasing them anymore, turns around and faces the vast openness of the wilderness, takes one big deep breath as free people. That hope, at that moment we saw the sea split. At that moment we perceived what life was really all about. I mean, the inner meaning of that is quite remarkable. In the Bible, water represents chaos. In the beginning of Genesis, Breshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heaven and earth. And the earth was tohu vavohu, mishmash, unformed and void. V'ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamayim. The Spirit of God hovered over the water. Well, if there's no creation yet, what's that water there? Water is the symbol in ancient Near Eastern civilizations of chaos, of uncreated mishmash. You ever had a roof leak and you had to call in a roofer and he told you the leak's way over there and it's staining your walls way over here? You know why water is a symbol of chaos. And what happens in Genesis, in the second day of creation, after God creates light on the first day, the second day of creation, God separates the water and brings dry land out of the water. That's a symbol of cosmos, of natural order. We live in a world where there are natural laws. Natural laws mean that they're patterns to the reality in which we live. And because they're patterns to the reality in which we live, the world we live in is predictable. Gravity works all the time. It would be a scary world if gravity only worked 9 times out of 10. Gravity works all the time. Inertia works all the time. The laws of physics work all the time, and that's why we can predict them. That's what science is. Science learns to understand the patterns of nature. And then technology is our way of gaining mastery over those patterns of nature. And that's what gives us power. 300-400 years ago, when this pandemic, if this pandemic had come, they wouldn't know what it meant. That's what happened to us, by the way. We were the victims of this. When the Black Plague came to Europe, they destroyed the Jewish communities because they thought it was the Jews who poisoned the wells. It was the Jews who poisoned the wells. It was superstitious. They couldn't figure out. They had no understanding of how the patterns of infectious disease spread. What's amazing is that when this thing came, we knew exactly what it was. It's a virus. We have pictures of it. You can see it. And within a year, there's a vaccine. And now all you got to do is find a vaccine. And for some of us, that's not so easy. But at least you'll find one and you'll be vaccinated. And that's a gift. That's a blessing. That's the blessing of living in an ordered universe, a cosmos. Well, if on the second day of creation in Genesis, God splits the waters to create natural order, here in Exodus, God splits the water and we walk through in dry land. That's a symbol that says the chaos of history gives way to a moral order. A moral order. What does the story of Pesach teach? You can't enslave a people forever. You can't enslave a people forever. Someday their impulses to freedom are going to rise up and they're going to fight back. You can't do cruelty forever. What did Martin Luther King teach us? The arc of history bends toward justice. It may take a while, but that's what we hope for. That is our faith. That is what we learned on the other side of the Red Sea. That's the moment of hope, and that's what the whole Seder is about. Now, when we get to the Magid section of the Seder, that's, I said, is the hardest one. So I prepared something to help a little bit. Let's take a look at that together. Let's take a look at that together. I'm going to do this in 4 sections. Why 4? I don't know. It seems to make a lot of sense. Pshat, Drash, Remez, Sod, the 4 ways that Jews read Bibles. First, there's Pshat. What should we tell the kids? Well, if you, nothing else, if your family is reasonably literate, then take the Exodus story from the book of Exodus. It's the first 3 chapters of the book of Exodus. And I have news for you. It's a great story. It happens to be a great story and it's easy to read, right? What I did is I divided it like a movie script because we live in Hollywood, right? The first part tells us about a king who didn't know Joseph. So I'm going to emphasize today, I did this during lunchtime, so those of you who are with me heard this already. There are 3 things that I would find in this story, but you can find many, many, many themes in this story. The first of the themes is power. Who has power? And the story of Exodus is going to tell you that ostensible power is not real power. That what looks like power might not really be power. Look at the beginning of the story. Joseph died and all of his brothers and all that generation. And the Israelites were fertile and numerous. They multiplied and increased greatly, and the land was filled with them. So we Jews, we did well in Egypt, thank you. A new king rose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. He didn't know the backstory. He didn't know where we came from. He didn't know how he ended up with a whole land full of Jews. Or he didn't want to know. Sometimes authorities don't want to know the history. And he said to his people, look, he said, the Israelite people are much too many for us. Let us deal wisely so they may not increase. Otherwise, in the event of war, they'll rise up and fight against us. Now, here's the king of Egypt, and he's Pharaoh. He's a god. He's the most powerful man in the land. He's the most powerful man in the world. He controls continents. But is he really powerful? Look at his thinking. He's afraid. He's afraid of these Jews who have no power. They're just an indigenous population. And look what happens. He set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. He's going to try 3 times to limit the population of the Israelites. The first time he's going to try, attempt number 1 is going to be with slavery. But wait a minute. I thought he was afraid of these people. If he could put taskmasters over them so easily, how powerful were they? How powerful were they? And then this raises a whole interesting question about what happens when a nation makes policy out of fear, and whether the thing you're afraid of is really what you're afraid of, and why we use fear as a political tool. All kinds of interesting questions here. But the more they were oppressed, the more they increased and spread out. So that's theme number one, power, and who really has power. Here comes theme number two. The enslaving the Israelites didn't limit their population, so now he's going to try limited genocide. Limited genocide. So the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives Shiphrah and Puah. Now, this phrase, Hebrew midwives, is a very controversial phrase because it can either mean midwives who are Hebrew, or it can mean midwives to the Hebrews. And I'm going to suggest it's the latter, for a couple of reasons. First of all, Shiphrah and Puah are Egyptian names. And second of all, why would Pharaoh think that Jewish midwives could be co-opted into his plan? When you deliver the Hebrew women, look at the birthing stone. If it's a baby boy, kill him. If it's a girl, let her live. So he goes to these two midwives and he says, I want you to join me in destroying the Israelite population. The midwives, fearing God, did not do as the king of Egypt told them. Fearing God. It's V'tirena et Elohim. It's not the God of Israel. It's God Elohim. And in the Bible, when you have the word yirah, meaning fear, it means conscience. Wherever you see yirat Elohim in the Bible, it refers to a non-Jewish person who has a sense of common morality, common decency, doing the right thing because it's the right thing. And here, even more so, Elohim is the God of nature. These are midwives. How do they get to be midwives? Well, today you go to a school, you go to UCSF and you get a degree in this, but not then. No doubt they learned from their mothers, who learned from their mothers, who learned from their mothers. For 10,000 generations, the human species was birthed into the world by women who had special hands, who knew how to calm a birthing woman, who knew how to bring the delivery to pass, who knew how to stop the bleeding with massage and with pressure points, who knew how to save an infant who was turned inside out or upside down. And you want to take these hands that are used to bringing life into the world, and turn them into the hands of a killer? They didn't do it. This is the first documented instance of civil disobedience in the name of a higher morality. Brandeis University every year gives a Shiphrah and Puah award. Martin Luther King was the first one, to someone who has defied the power of the authorities to do what is right. Now, the problem is Pharaoh's been killing people in order to achieve his policy ends. So if you've just disobeyed him, you're in trouble. So what do? The midwives, so the king of Egypt summoned them and said, why have you done this thing, letting the boys live? And the midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women, they're beasts. Before a midwife can come, they've given birth. They repeat back to him his own propaganda. How did Pharaoh get his populace to turn on the Israelites? The same way Joseph Goebbels did it in the 1930s. He dehumanized them through metaphor, through propaganda. Goebbels called us a vermin. We're like rodents that infest your kitchen. Call an exterminator. Goebbels called us a cancer on the body politic. Call a surgeon to cut us away. Pharaoh said that we're not human. So the midwives simply repeat back to them, repeat back to Pharaoh in the presence of the entire court. And what can he do? He can't disagree. And the Bible concludes this section with a very interesting statement. God rewarded the midwives, the people increased, and because they feared God and protected us, God gave them descendants. Now, you didn't need to know this. In fact, the whole incident doesn't really belong here because it was a failure. It was a failed policy. So why is it here? I think it's here for a very important reason. And those of you who remember my teacher, Harold Schulweis, know exactly why it's here. When Rabbi Schulweis needed to teach the Holocaust to his children and to his students, he realized that to tell a story as dark and as grim and as demonic as the Shoah would just break everyone's heart and lead us nowhere. So he told a different story. Got a lot of trouble for this, but he told a different story. He told the story about Christian rescuers. And it turns out that in every land where the Nazis controlled, there was somebody, Christians and Muslims, who saved Jews. Yes, compared to the perpetrators, compared to the bystanders, they were a tiny minority, but enough to save thousands and thousands and thousands of Jews, and enough to save our idea that human beings are still capable of moral action under bad conditions, under conditions of terrible, terrible pressure. And that's what this story is about. Why does the Bible tell us that they had descendants? So that we would remember that the world is filled with allies, and that the only reason we're here is because two brave midwives defied their king to save our lives. The second level here is that morality. But I want to show you one more little thing about this. They're women. If the story lays out that the men are all on the side of death and the women are all on the side of life, and that's a remarkable telling of the story. One other one, quickly. Now we move from the macro to the micro, from the vast story of a policy of a king to one family, to one individual soul. A certain man of the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman, and she conceived and bore a son. So the greatest resistance in a time of genocide is to have a kid. But the problem is, once you have a kid, what are you going to do with him? And I want you to notice how many times the word see is in this story. In Hebrew, ro'eh. And look at how it's used. When she saw how beautiful he was, she hid him for 3 months. Now, you could read that and not notice it because, I mean, come on. I mean, so if he were a miskite, she would have turned him over to Pharaoh's police? I mean, come on. Of course she thinks he's a beautiful baby. Every Jewish mother thinks he's a beautiful baby. That's not what it says. Vatere oto kitovu. Kitov doesn't mean he's adorable. He's Gerber baby box, beautiful. Kitov is the same language of creation. Vayar Elohim kitov. He's cosmic. He has something about him, and she's going to hold on to this baby as long as she can, but when she can't hide him anymore, either because his crying is too loud or because she can't live with the nightmares anymore. She puts him in a basket and floats him up the Nile. Act 2, Scene 2. The daughter of Pharaoh comes down. She's surrounded by all these maidens, but she's the only one who sees the basket. And she goes and gets the basket. Now, if you're holding a basket with a baby in it, you really don't need to take the top off the basket to know that it's a baby. But that's not what this is about. She takes the basket and she opens it. What does her father want her to see? What did Pharaoh teach her to see? What did Joseph Goebbels teach the German people to see when they saw a Jewish child? Not a human, not a child, not a boy, not a girl, not an infant, not something tender and beautiful and sweet, but something dangerous, something dehumanized, but not Pharaoh's daughter. Because just like his birth mother, his adoptive mother has special eyes. She sees past the propaganda, past the projected images of the culture. She sees what? He's a baby. He's crying. And she took pity on it. Not pity, but her maternal instincts. Her maternal instincts were inspired, were raised at that point. And in case you wonder, well, maybe she didn't know, she says, this is a Hebrew kid, but I want him. I want him as a son. The sister says, I'll get you a wet nurse. So the mother gets to nurse him, and she brings him back to Pharaoh, back to Pharaoh's palace, back to Pharaoh's daughter, where he's raised. Now, this white space here between the end of Scene 2 and the beginning of Scene 3, this is where Jeffrey Katzenberg squeezed the whole movie Prince of Egypt. It's all right there. None of it's in the Bible. But now he grows up. This boy who has two identities. He's Prince of Egypt. He's child of slaves. He's the daughter of a slave woman. He's the son of a slave woman, the son of a slave woman, and the son of the daughter of Pharaoh, the grandson of Pharaoh. Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on? He goes out to his people, but who are his people? And he sees their suffering, but suffering isn't the word. The word is sivlotam, which means labors. It could mean either suffering, or you still don't know what he identifies with. Now, it's interesting, by the way, that when you look at a mass social experience, it's very hard to see it. It's hard to see a Holocaust. So the most powerful piece of Holocaust literature is the diary of an innocent 13-year-old German-Dutch girl named Anna Frank. It's very hard to see mass social experiences. So he sees one. He goes out and he sees an Egyptian man beating a Hebrew man. Vayar ish mitzri makeh ish ivri, one of his brothers. Now it's interesting what he sees. The average Egyptian walking by sees a taskmaster hitting a slave. What does he see? Absolutely nothing. What is a slave? A slave is a quantity of work embodied. It's an appliance. Not one of you is going to wake up tomorrow morning, go ask the refrigerator if it had a good night, or the microwave if it's doing well. But that's what a slave is in the mind of Egypt. Slaves are socially invisible. But Moses, like his mothers, doesn't see what the culture has taught him to see. He doesn't see taskmaster beating slave. He doesn't see Egyptian beating Hebrew. He sees Ish Mitzri, an Egyptian human being, a man, beating another man. And he sees that he's beating him to death. And he realizes that that's his brother. That's the moment of identification. And he looks this way and that. Now, you could say he's looking to see if anybody's watching him, so what he's about to do, he won't get busted for, but I think it's bigger than that. He sees a travesty. He sees a horror. He sees something so remarkably ugly, and he can't imagine that. Why no one's stopping to watch? Why does no one see? And then he realizes that this is his moment. And Moses has a problem. He doesn't speak. He uses action, and he gets violent, and he strikes down the Egyptian. So first look for the power relationships in the story. And then look for the male-female stuff in the story. The men are on the side of death, and 5 women save the Jewish people. Shifra Pua, the birth mother, the adopted mother, and the sister. And then look for this idea of vision. What do we see? What have we been taught to see by our culture? And what does it take to open our eyes and to really see? And then later he's going to see a bush burning but not consumed. And God says, I see the suffering of my people. Just if everybody at the table can read, this just is a great story to tell. Let's go a little bit deeper. Level 2. Drash. The moral of the story is the story of morals. Why? Why is it so important that we tell this story? Why is it we tell the story in the first person? Why is it important that this becomes our master story? Because this is the birth of hope, and this is the birth of our ethics. How many times in the Torah are we told to do something because we were slaves in the land of Egypt? Here are a few ideas. You shall not wrong a stranger or oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You'll not ill-treat any widow or orphan. Think of that a minute. Who is the stranger, the widow, or the orphan? They're vulnerable. They're helpless. In a patriarchal society, a widow cannot sue in court if she's cheated. An orphan has no standing in the court if someone takes something from him. And the stranger, even today, by the way, the alien, can't go into a court and get redress of grievance. You could take advantage of them, and you could get away with it. The Torah says, don't do that. You're better than that. Why? Because you were a stranger in the land of Egypt. This is an ethic of empathy. See, not only do you not oppress them, because the tendency in life is not even to see them. The helpless and the hopeless around us are vulnerable, but they're rendered socially invisible, so we don't even see them anymore. Torah says, open your eyes and see them because you are them. You maintain that identity within you. You never stop being them. This is the ethic of empathy. This is a very powerful ethic. Let's do just another quickly. The Shabbos. Observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy as God has commanded you. 6 days you'll work. On the seventh is a Sabbath. You'll not do any work. You, your son or daughter, your male or female slave or servant, your ox, your ass, any of your cattle, even the stranger who lives with you. Everyone rests, including the animals, so that the slave doesn't have to work. Remember, you were a slave in the land of Egypt. That's why I'm telling you to make a Shabbos. So 6 days a week, you can say to your servant, go get me a sandwich and a soda from the refrigerator, and 6 days a week, he's going to get it for you. But on the seventh, if you say to him, go get me a sandwich and a soda, what's he going to say? Go get your own damn sandwich and soda. Because on the seventh day, he stops being your servant. On the seventh day, he goes back to being your equal. That's remarkable. The social hierarchy collapses once a week on Shabbos, which means that if you ever started to think that the rich are rich and the poor are poor, that the boss is a boss and the underling, the servant is a servant, and that's the way God created the world, once a week we erase all of that. All of those distinctions are erased. And everyone becomes everyone else's equal, so that we remember that that's not the way the universe was built. That's the way we organized it for the moment. But underneath that social organization, every one of us is created in God's image. There's no one who is metaphysically a slave or a servant or an underling. Not built into the universe to have that role. That's what this teaches. So there's a whole set of these ethics. And I suggest that this becomes, at your Seder table, a really interesting conversation, if you have the time and people at the table who'd like to talk about this stuff. In the VBS Haggadah, there's a page with this called The Ethics of Exodus. And I offer this to you. And this is a little bit of a section from Michael Walzer, the great political philosopher, about what we learned from the experience of being in Egypt. Now let's go one more step. Level 3, which remez means the deeper meaning. The question here is, are we really free? Well, I want to skip this first session. I want to go to this text. Irving Greenberg, Yitz Greenberg, one of my dear, dear teachers. He's living in Jerusalem these days. The most devastating effect of slavery ultimately is that the slave internalizes the master's values and accepts the condition of slavery as his proper status. People who live in chronic conditions of poverty, hunger, and sickness tend to show similar patterns of acceptance and passivity. As with slaves, their deprivation deprives them or derives from their political and economic status and then becomes moral and psychological reality. This was the reality that was overthrown in Exodus. A slave soon becomes a slave. After a while, a slave says, that's who and what I am. And a slave becomes a slave so thoroughly that he forgets that he's a slave. And he accepts this as his natural condition. The deepest kind of slavery is the slavery of the mind. When a slave forgets he is a slave. Here are two wonderful comments from two great Hasidic rabbis. The verse in Exodus 2, a long time after that, the king of Egypt died and the Israelites were groaning. They never groaned. When Pharaoh first makes them slaves, we saw that text, they didn't complain. They didn't complain. Why didn't they complain when he made them slaves? I mean, Jews are really good at complaining, especially when you make them work that hard. And why aren't they complaining? Because their slavery became part of their identity. And here's what the Gera Rebbe, this is the Sfas Emet, it's a 19th century Hasidic rabbi. Until the king died, they were so deeply sunk in exile, they didn't even feel it. It's only once that redemption began. And he says, this is what happens in exile. There are those who are prisoners in exile, unable to broaden out the point of divine life within them. They need to be brought forth from that prison. But there are others who were not really in exile, but only there for the common good. That's who Moses was. He was prepared for redemption. In essence, he was no longer in exile. Now, what is he saying? The Israelites were so deeply enslaved that when Moses came and said to them, I'm here to redeem you from slavery, they said, what? Redeem us from what? And he said, you're slaves. And they said, no, we're not. And he said, of course you are. Look at you. You're slaves. And they said, no, this is who we are. So that raises this incredible question for your Seder table. To what are we slaves and have forgotten that we're slaves? To what are we bound and forgot that we're bound? What binds us? What enslaves us? And we don't even know it. We don't even know it. And what would it take to be free? According to the Sfas Emes, Moses shows up and they don't believe him, except they look at him and they see him and he looks like them and he talks like them, but he isn't like them. And they know, and they begin to compare themselves to him, and they realize, that's when they realize that he's free and they're not. And that's when they begin to feel their slavery. Their slavery was so bad, they didn't complain. They didn't complain. It's only when they realize that they're slaves that they rebel against it. And this is the same thing that the Bratslaver, who's a rabbi a century before the Gerer Rebbe, talks about. He says basically in the gematria of chametz and seor, grain and leavening, is the same gematria as Eitz Hadat, the tree of knowledge. And what that means is that the deepest kind of chametz in the world is the sourness of the mind. And that's what Pesach is. It's about to sweep all the sourness of our minds out. In Mitzrayim, in Egypt, Da'at, intimate knowledge and conscious awareness, is in exile. Mitzrayim is when you get used to your slavery and cease to see it as bondage. The best example of this in modern literature that I could find is this beautiful statement, and you can get this online, you can use mine. This is Martin Luther King's letter from the Birmingham jail. Remember what this was? King goes to Birmingham, Alabama, and starts organizing boycotts, and he gets arrested. And he gets thrown in jail. And he's sitting in jail and he's wondering why he's the only minister. There's a number of ministers with him, but why the vast majority of black ministers wasn't supporting him. And believe it or not, he writes this on toilet paper and smuggles it out. And he says to them, look at yourselves. You've become so used to segregation, so used to discrimination, so used to hatred. The humiliations of being a black man in the American South have become so normal for you, you don't even notice them anymore. Open your eyes and get angry. You get angry. The problem is that the moment you open your eyes and you see your own bondage, it hurts. It really hurts. And the ministers, of course, were saying to him, don't make waves, it's going to get worse. And he said, there comes a time when you have to step up. And the language here is quite beautiful. You have to step up and you have to fight back because you have to save your own humanity. And that's the deeper message of the Exodus. To what are we slaves? To what prejudices and biases and racisms have we become so inured to that we don't even notice them until someone comes and says, open your eyes, man. Look, see, look what you've done. One more level. And that's the biggest picture. And that is this question of hope. And what does it mean to have hope? Right? And this is the great hope. Elie Wiesel, survivor of Auschwitz, great teller of the story of the Shoah, writes in his book called A Jew Today, our people's lost many of its children, were alone and sad, and we've entered more difficult times. The era ahead will be critical, and yet, he says, and yet, we owe it to our past not to lose hope. Not to lose hope. Say what you will, despair is not the solution. I think that's terribly important. Despair is not the solution. And in order not to lose hope, that's what Pesach is all about. And this year, especially with all the trials and all the ordeals that we've been through, to be able to look up and not to look down, to be able to look up and to say, I have hope. I think the world's changing. I think we might be changing. That's a gift to us all. My teacher, David Hartman, wrote about this, and he's a wonderful, sensitive soul. And he says, look, we have two models on which we can model Jewish life, Auschwitz or Sinai. Hartman was always enraged when every diplomat and every VIP would come to Israel. The first place they would take them would be Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial. And he said, that's wrong. And by the way, and every high school senior in Israel takes a trip to Europe to go visit the concentration camps. He said, that's the wrong message. We did not return to the land of Israel. We have not awakened as a people in our generation because we want to push back Hitler. That's not why we are. We want to do it because of a different reason, because of Sinai. Sinai completes the freedom that was given us at the Red Sea. Sinai completes the freedom that we gained in Egypt. And he says, really interestingly, it is important to remember that the Jewish people did not go from the suffering conditions of Egypt directly to the land. We first went to Sinai and made a covenant with God and pledged absolute allegiance to the commandments. We spent years in the desert casting off the mantle of the suffering slave. After we overcome the humiliating memory of slavery and persecution and understood that we were called to bear witness to God's kingdom and history, only then did we enter the land. We remember that we were slaves, but more than that, we have structured the holidays so that we remember that we're free and we celebrate our freedom. And our freedom comes with responsibilities. Our freedom comes with obligations. Our freedom comes with a job to do in the world, with a role to play in the world. It's interesting to me that when the rabbis created our Haggadah and our Seder, they gave us a Seder plate, but it doesn't have 5 measures of maror on it. It only has 1. And when you eat the bitter herb, you eat it with the sweetness of charoset, because the holiday is ultimately not about the bitterness of being a slave. It's about the glory of being free and the possibility that our being free is a symbol of what can happen to the world. That the Pesach of yesterday is an indication of a Pesach yet to come tomorrow. And that's the great faith. That's why you open the door to Elijah, because Elijah is the precursor of the Messiah. And the Pesach of yesterday gives way to the freedom of tomorrow. And that's really what the Passover is about. So I offer you all this stuff. I'll put all of it in the chat. We put it on the website. You're welcome to all of this. You can steal it and tell your family that you're brilliant and found all this stuff, and use it to make the holiday sweet, the holiday special. If anyone has a question, I'd be glad to answer any of your questions, all 4 of them. But for those who are going to be leaving us now, let me wish you a wonderful Pesach. It's an interesting thing in the Jewish, in Hebrew, you say Chag Pesach Sameach. But in Yiddish, you say Azizin Pesach. You don't say a happy Pesach, you say a sweet Pesach. And I think that's a really beautiful way to think about the Passover. So I offer you all of my secrets here, and you're welcome to these. And I hope it's a really very special Pesach for everybody. If anyone has a question that they would like to share, I will do my very best to try to answer. I'll even give you recipes if I can think of any. And I hope that this has been helpful to everybody. Yes, Marcia, hi. You have to unmute, which is a word that didn't exist a century ago. So.
I can't find my fleshig pots.
Oh, never. You want me to tell you where they are? Is that what you're asking for?
No, how do I capture my existing ones, my fleshig pots? Can I do that?
Yeah, they're what are they made out of? Steel, right? They're stainless steel. Yeah, sure. Wash them out real thoroughly. If you really want to be frum about it, boil them, but I don't even think you need to do that. Stainless steel doesn't take stains. That's why it's called stainless steel. So just wash them out thoroughly and use them for Pesach. That's fine. I got to tell you, especially this year with the Mishagas we're going through, you don't go nuts. Chametz isn't metaphysical. Chametz is physical. So if you clean it well, you've done well. We use our normal silverware. We use all our normal glassware. We use our pots.
Wow.
We use all that stuff. Now, if it's your mother's tradition to use other stuff, go ahead and do it. But you really can do that without going crazy. Now, my Orthodox cousins boil everything. The only reason is because in medieval times, that was the only way to clean something. But they didn't have dishwashers that heat up to 180 degrees. They didn't have, Dawn for dishes like we do. So I would say wash them thoroughly, clean them, dry them, use them. Be my guest. Okay?
Thank you.
Good. Other questions? Anyone have a question? Yes, Arnie Porath. Arnold Porath, you're up. Mr. Porath.
Hi. Greetings. I'm a relatively new member.
We're delighted to have you. Welcome. So glad you're
Delighted
here.
to be a part of this. I wonder if you'd comment on the four sons. And for so many years, I always felt it's one son.
Sure, it is.
It's the same. It's the growth pattern that everyone goes through.
I love that. I think that's really very sweet. I think that's really, really, really wonderful. It's the growth pattern. And of course, it's the growth pattern, but it's more than that. You could see it that way, of course. You certainly could see it that way. It's the growth pattern. We all go through those stages. I think that we maintain a piece of that. Every one of us has moments when we are the wise, and moments when we are the wicked, and moments when we are simple, and moments when we are just flabbergasted. I think all of us are that way. I think there are people who inhabit those roles in life all the time. One of the exercises that I did, if you like movies, if anyone's here likes movies, take the film Schindler's List and tell me when in the film he is the wise, when he's the wicked, when he's the simple, and when he's the silent. And you'll see it in exactly your point, how one man can inhabit all four roles as he grows a soul, as he's growing morally. Remember, opening of the movie, he's drinking and trying to do business with the Nazis by bribing them. Later on, he's on a picnic with some beautiful woman. Of course, he's in Krakow and his wife is in Prague, but that doesn't stop him from having affairs and picnics as the Lublin ghetto is as the Krakow ghetto is being liquidated. And then slowly he grows a soul and he begins to become engaged. And I think it's a wonderful observation that these are things we all go through. It's not children who sit at the table. These are the states of our own souls. And that's a wonderful way to interpret it. I congratulate you. Kol hakavod. Thank you. Other questions, comments, counter sermons, suggestions? Anyone know what Sephardic charoset tastes like? Get someone who is Sephardic to teach you how to make Sephardic charoset. If you're a gringo like me, and you make charoset out of apples and nuts, it's good. But a Sephardic charoset made out of dates is out of this world. And if you happen to have a Persian friend who will lend you a little Persian charoset, you'll see what freedom really tastes like. So try that too. That's another way to make your Seder great. All right, last time, any questions? Anyone have a question they want to ask? Well, then let me wish all of you a happy, healthy, and sweet Pesach. And I hope that the holiday is very sweet. Tomorrow morning, if anyone is a firstborn and would like to join us, the siyum of the firstborn is tomorrow morning. The davening begins at 7:30 and we'll begin learning at 8:15, just for a little bit of learning. And then, of course, on Seder night, which is Saturday night, at 5 o'clock, we have a Seder program for little kids, for little ones. And at 6 o'clock, I'll be leading a community Seder here on Facebook. And on YouTube. Just put your computer on a pillow at the head of the table and we'll pretend that we're together this year. Drink good wine and have a sweet, wonderful Seder.
I have a quick
Yasher
question.
Koach, Rabbi.
Who has a quick question?
I want to make a homemade matzah this year. Do you know how do I get like
the correct flour for that, or where
I
I'd
don't.
get that from?
I don't think you can get it now. You probably could have ordered it a while ago, but I think it would be really hard to get it now. But if you want to try to go get it, call one of the kosher supermarkets like Cambridge Farms and see if they have it. But it might be worth its weight in gold at this point. So you can just go and call and ask them if they have it. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
I was at Cambridge Farms last night, and they have shmura matzah for $40 a box. And so I suggested to a young Hasidic looking gentleman that he forget the matzah and just eat the box. It's so much tastier. He was not amused. Anyway, to everybody, a happy, healthy, sweet, and wonderful